Welcome to the Unveiling of the System. This is another class in that series. This class is titled The Sovereign Military and the Galicians and Lodomeria. So in this class, we're going to begin to unpack the sovereign military, some of the terms, definitions, keywords that are going to be used in conjunction to the upper levels of the sovereign military, which is going to get into the protector departments. So what I want to start with is you see behind me some sigils, some symbols. All of these are very important and play an important key in my story. I've shared in my testimony and affidavit form about Nazis and the connection between Nazis and the Luciferian Brotherhood and the sovereign military order. One of the main Nazis being Michael Karkoc, who was one of my main trainers in the system. He was known as the Legion of Defense leader for Adolf Hitler. Now, in that, there's some hidden terms. I've talked about how connected to this system, you have the governance side, which is known as the Brotherhood side. Connected underneath that, you have what is called the council of the system. One of the names for the council can be Galactic Federation or Alliance. However, that very term is also connected to the sovereign military side. And where does that term Galactic Federation or Galactic Alliance come from? That comes from a word called Galicia. Now, let me quick go to screen share and show a few things here. As we begin to look at this, we're talking about the sovereign military order, which I've shown in this symbol with their contract of an upside down triangle. At the very top of that system, we have those that are known as protectors. So some of the names that this council can go by is Galactic Federation or Galactic Alliance. They also can be known as Galicia or Galicians. Notice that when you take that word, you end up with three main words here. And I want to especially point out that very last part, because that's important, who's all connected in that. This word breaks down here where you have the Galicia, which is a play on words. You have the C, which connects back in the system to their beliefs of the 7 C's. Now we're going to get into later where that stems from even more. This breaks down to a few locations. First, in the Bible, this is connected to the land of Galatia or the Galicians, and that was a land known as the land of Gaul. It also connected then to Galilee in scripture. The same land, like in Hebrew, the plural for it comes from the Hebrew word for Gaul, which known, singularly was Shehaf, otherwise Seshephem. The im at the end there means plural, the land of many seabirds. It also connects to the word circle or circles. So that's important to point out because we're going to start to see some of that in the imagery that we're going to look at. This land also, as we begin to break down, so we have sovereign military is going to be connected to several locations known as the Galicia, and then you're also going to have it connect to another location. So this breaks down into two sides. You have the Galicia side, and then you also have the Lodomeria side. Both of these are lands, and we're going to look at those. But first, let's look at what is Lodo in Ukrainian means mud or sticky. And then you have Myria being a form of Mary, Mary literally meaning I am Mary. So that all of this is going to be very important to our understanding of things. You also have it being connected to the breakdown of that word meaning hopeful dream. So as you begin to look at this, we enter into different places in time. So as we begin to get into this, first I encourage you can go back to the unveiling of the system courses that are available on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. And there will be many in this series. It's going to be an ongoing, continuous series breaking down different aspects of the system. So as we begin to look at this, I talk about in these breakdowns how we can know and understand the system by their symbols, by their images, by their badges, all of those things, connect them to who are they, how do they work and operate, and how does that affect us in our country now today? So here we see the coat of arms for Galicia, and this is going to be the connection. There's several locations that come into this. So that's important to understand. Galicia and Lodomeria, where are they? What are some of the different symbols that we're seeing? We're going to get into another part where we break down the different crests that we see. So for now, I just kind of want to point out the images, how in this we see this two-headed black eagle. We see often within the Luciferian Brotherhood groups, we'll see this lapel that's decorated with different signs, symbols, colors, ribbons, crosses, different emblems. All of this imagery represents authorities, contracts, governance, and jurisdictions that they're allowed to operate out of. In fact, we began to speak about how crosses tell us something. It tells us about their contracts. Even in this one, just basically, we see three short crosses representing the main Solomonic pole contract and the contracts with Ashtaroth. But we see three of them here, one in red, one in green, one in white. So what does that mean? That's three separate contracts under the Solomonic magic orders with Ashtaroth, each represented by a different color and connected to a different emblem. You've got an inner emblem, a middle emblem, and an outer emblem there, all representing governance and different forms of governance. So we'll get into that in another part of this series. For now, I just kind of want to begin to make some of the connections. So in the orders of Melchizedek within the system, we know that there's different imagery that they use. We've talked about the three line or pole contracts. One being like in this imagery, you would see that middle line contract here. You would see the second pole here and the third pole there representing that threefold contract. In some of their books, like the Initiates of the Flame or Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn or the Book of Knowledge, they'll show a circle here in the middle representing the order of Melchizedek, and then they'll show the two wings on each side. One side representing the order of the Phoenix, also connected to what they're going to put that under is Enoch. And then you've got on the other side the order of the Golden Dawn, and they're going to put that under the sign of Michael. Now, each of these also are going to be under and connected to cherubic signs, houses of Israel, the encampments of Israel, and the sacred guards. So all of that's important. We're going to also see a couple other crests here. We're going to see this one where we see the three crowns, and we also see the crow with that. We're also going to see this one, which is the same here, where you see the Holy Grail. You see a pearl sitting on top of the Holy Grail, and we see 7 crosses around that. So all of those are going to become significant as we begin to look at these symbols And what is the connection between Karkoc, Galicia, and Lodomeria, and their connection to the sovereign military programs set up within the United States that are being used to train children up in the sovereign military order and in the Luciferian Brotherhood? So, again, we mentioned several books. This is the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch. That cover of the book, you see what I was talking about, explaining how you've got kind of the threefold imagery representing the system. We see the main body of the bird being that center piece that we look at. That's the main line contract in Solomonic magic, representing these three lines not only represent the system of Solomonic magic, but they represent governance over hosts of armies. We begin to get into the spiritual world, the structure of the spiritual armies, both the heavenly hosts and the fallen ones. So Lucifer's army. And so this main one represents those main contracts. You know, what are you going to have at the very top? You'll have a contract with Abaddon. In the middle, you have a contract with Ashtaroth. And on the bottom, you have a contract with Leviathan. Now notice that bottom, that Leviathan contract begins to connect into the seven rays of light that we see, or what's known as the seven seas. Now we also see within that the two wings representing the Order of the Phoenix and the Order of the Golden Dawn. So the seven rays of light also have several names. They can be called the seven daggers. They can be called the seven seas. They can connect to the golden prayer, which calls them the seven swords, the seven dolars, or they can also be called in the system, depending on if those in the sovereign military, are they considering themselves more light side or dark side? If they're considering themselves more light side, these are going to be connected to the seven sufferings. Those are trials, tribulations, things that they will need to go through in order to earn their degrees. If they're more dark side, they are often referred to as the seven swords or daggers. Let me take that back. The swords are connected to the sufferings, and the dark side, they're going to be the seven daggers connected to the seven blasphemies. And again, those will be trials that they go through. So we begin to see that imagery. And as we begin to look, there's other imagery that we see connected to that book that they don't outright put on the cover, but as you begin to study the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch, which is, highly connected to all this, what does this represent? It literally represents the sigil of Metatron and serves as a key for us to begin to understand what they're talking about. So that key is outlined both internationally as well as across the United States and gives them certain understanding to locations, things that they're going to, places they're going to go to for their training, things that they're going to go through for their training. So as we look at this Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch, there's some key things I want to point out here. Some of those being right in the first pages of the book. What does it say about the book? It says a teaching given on 7 levels. So remember on the cover, we talked about those 7 rays of light and all that those can represent. So here, the theme of the 7 is also going to be connected to 7 levels, 7 different levels of teaching that are given. It's to be read and visualized. So in this, they're teaching you in all the imagery how to read different things, different languages, all at one time. At the same time, what does visualize mean? It means you're going to see it in your mind's eye, meaning you're going to see it in the spirit realm. So it's not just something you're going to read, you're also going to enter into the spirit realm, and there's going to be an experience that comes with this book. And what is it in preparation for? it's in preparation for the Brotherhood of Light. This is training in the Brotherhood system, and it's to be delivered for the quickening of the people of light. So it's meant to train up those who are part of the Brotherhood system. So all of this is important in beginning to understand the different things that we're looking at. All of this is interconnected. So again, they're going to do everything by sign, symbols, and imagery. So when we look at things like these crests, all of this is imagery that means something to them. You know, we even see it here in the Galatia coat of arms of Spain. We see the Holy Grail, we see the mother pearl there representing the seed of the mothers of darkness, and others that they may call mothers in the system. That's going to go back to some of their beliefs, their teachings within the system that are handed down, and the ancient protectors of those systems. So you see that structured around that pearl, there are 7 main crosses there. And what do those crosses represent? You know, those represent different departments within that sovereign military structure. You're going to have, I've talked about how there's 6 main departments in the protectors, but you also have some hidden departments that are within that are headed up by that 6th department in the system. And the head of that, who oversaw that initially, you had Michael Karkoc, who understood all of this. Within this 7th department, you have the training up of elite women or women female warriors that go by several names. You have those that are called the auxiliary of the Sisters of Light. You also have a group known as the 7 Deadly Sins, spelled CYNS. And each of those 7 deadly sins are in charge of certain areas, certain things connected to their scope of security within the system. So it's kind of like this outlines would be an image for outlining the security of the system. How do they structure their security and their military? So notice in here you have a 3-fold governance headed up by this one department here. You know, their job specifically is, you know, to be underneath the mothers of darkness and to protect the heirs that are going to come out of the heads of these structures. So some of that connects to one of the areas of Galicia or Galicia. You know, it went by many different names again, like I said, part of that being connected to Spain. The other part of it then goes to some other places. So as we begin to look at Galicia and Lodomeria, you then not only have the connection to Spain, you also have the connection to the Ukraine area, and you also have the connection to their mirror in the United States, which when we begin to look at the maps, we'll begin to see some of the mirroring going on in this area and why the Aleutian Islands and Alaska is so important within the system and their connection to this area as what they call it as Ragnarok. So getting into that, where does the imagery, we see that on that crest, we've got the 2-headed double black eagles. Other eagles in the system, you'll see the same imagery in gold, or you could see it white. You can see the wings up and fully spread out, defining the feathers like you see in this image, or you could see the feathers not very much defined like you do in this image here. You also can see the wings down, which when the wings are down or beginning to mount like they're going to take flight, those represent the junior or the youth programs. So in this, as we begin to look, what are some of the meanings of that black eagle? It really goes back to the Holy Roman Empire. And I like this symbol because it shows often how it's represented. In the system, those at the higher level, they don't just see like a eagle with feathers with two heads. They're going to see things like this based on what their position, what their authority is, and how they need to govern things. We see overlapping of symbology, which I've talked about how they'll overlap images. So this core part here, which could be seen as a single Roman colonnade, also can be seen as a cross with Christ, a man on it. In the Cabal of the Golden Dawn, you'll see this same imagery as the tree of life, where you'll have the tree up here. You'll see the man in the middle with his arms outstretched across that main crossbar there, representing his contracts with principalities. And then you also will see a woman down here at the bottom part, and her standing on a Leviathan, a sea underneath. So, this is the same imagery we see in the Rosicrucian layman, where, you'll see the rose, the middle rose here, representing that contract between the man and the woman. All of this, represents their spiritual gates. It represents, it's the key map to all where they've put the dumb bases, both in the United States and internationally. It's their key code to their military as well, and who's governing the countries and what brotherhood orders or sovereign military orders are in charge of the different areas. So we see the two-headed black eagle, representing several different kingdoms. That's really what this, is meaning. Not only is it for Galicia, but it also is for Rome. And then who else? We also see this same eagle being represented in the German flag, the same coloring that we see highlighted in these emblems. You see the gold, you see the red, you see the black. So we see how kind of, how they're using some of the same imagery, the same colors. Why do they even use the same colors? Well, the colors go back to certain color contracts, and those are connected to certain principalities, powers, and authorities that are governing in those areas. They also get into, your light contracts, or meaning your yellow spectrum contracts, which are going to be your day contracts, versus your night contracts, which will be enlisted under the moon contracts. So all of that begins to get into play, and then even gets to, the Galactic Federation, which is not just something made up. You have people that are taking pieces of the knowledge of the sovereign military, universal military, and they begin to expand on that, trying to outline the things that are really in operations behind the scenes with principalities, spiritual forces, powers, and fallen angels. So, who are the keepers of this knowledge? And, how are they going to work and operate? What are the different symbols and things that they're going to use to represent this? Now, what's interesting is that when we begin to look at that word Galicia, what does that mean? It means white, milky, white as milk. What are they talking about with that? What does Galactic Federation mean? It's highly connected to the Milky Way. None of this is just by accident. They're literally taking things that are used in one thing and putting into another. In this, it even gets further into what the system would classify as the milk contracts. And they're not meaning necessarily your milk that you drink from a cow. They're getting into universal contracts and the things that are connected to those contracts. So, those contracts are split into several different images. Even we see, one of the base symbols for Ukraine, you have what looks like a triton, which isn't just connected to things of the water, or that symbol is used in our military, it's used in connection to waterways, it's used in connection to water cities, hidden things that we normally don't even think about. But it also is connected to things connected to Norway, Sweden, the Ragnarok themes. It also is connected to the Valkyries. When you see that imagery of Isis with her crown and the Valkyries, we see kind of the same fold imagery with the phallic symbol and the wings on the side, going back to that base symbology of the threefold brotherhood. So even in this, in Galatia, you have Galicia, you've got, then that splits into the Lodomeria, and then you also have the Galicia of Spain. So that threefold contract. And so as we begin to look at this, we see that Galicia area, and we see some different things. So what I want to point out is that some of the words that this breaks into, because you have Lodomeria was Latinized, and its Latinized name was Ruthenian, which was a principality, Vladimir. So you get the connection between Volodymyr, which I'm kind of saying it slower. So you've got the Volod Mir. When that's broken down, that's also connected to the Volhynia, which was seen as kind of this area connected to, like, when it breaks down, you've got some of these smaller areas. This was known as the original Galicia. You've also got the Golden Horde there. All of that being connected to the Ukrainian area off of the Black Sea. Now, with that, we begin to see some of the connections, like the infighting for land. We see how things are beginning to be broken off into different sections based on their interconnections. Even in the Lodomeria symbol in their crest, we see this imagery of the double six bricks representing the walls. Where are some of the walls that are ritual walls? You have both the walls to Molech and the walls to Baal. So their imagery connecting back to the walls and the sacred cities that were given trust, the individuals who are going to have trust of preserving and watching over those walls. These areas then begin to break off into further countries throughout time. Again, as we look through that, we see some of the further connections off that Black Sea area, what became the Khazar Empire, the Khazarian Jews, as well as the Bulgarian Empire. So all of that is very important. And here we see that dome of the Black Sea, and along that, where in this imagery would we see those islands that now they've transpired to another area, mimicked it here, right? And where some of those bases, again, looking where those main sites are, that's important to understand how things would transpire back. Why are there certain things highlighted? It's because they're important to the system, and they want people at those higher levels to get the connection, because it's a map in their mind. If they learn one thing, they can transpose it across many different things to understand the layouts of how things have been set up. Getting further into this, when we look at that Laodicea and Galicia, so Lodomeria, again, their name was changed to the Ruthenian Principality of Vladimir, and later they were given by the Habsburg monarchy, which is connected to the French Brotherhood. They were given the name Galicia or Galicia. And in that, Lodomeria became known as an area. Some of the other names that also went hand in hand with that was that you get in Ukrainian, it was called Halik, Halych, or Halka, or Jakda, which those words in Ukrainian mean female crow. So why do we see, on some of the crests, we see the crow symbology that goes back to the Ukrainian words halka or halik being territory, an area, one of the ancient cities in that area connected to Ukraine. And what's the main thing about that area? What is raised up? You see the three gold domes there representing the Orthodox Church. So here's where we get the introduction, the connection. We know that the Jesuit Catholic Church is connected to one of the departments of the system, but we also have the Greek Orthodox Church highly connected and hidden within their connection to the Brotherhood system. We know that the Catholic Church and Orthodox churches, that there's a split. Originally, they were one. And what was that split? It involved different sections, different trainings, different training programs within the system, but all interconnected. So, the Greek Orthodox Church is highly connected in this, especially in regards to the galactic or the sovereign military. We see, the primary structures of the Orthodox Church being broken into different sections, those different sections being connected to quadrant and regional leaders within the sovereign military. Also given another name that goes back to some of the connection of the first words that we looked at, which is going to be the words connecting to the seabird, which were spelled, Schachafim. The Sachafim, which what does that connect to? That then, instead of Maria or Maria, I am Mary, they blended the words and you end up with mafia. And therefore, a lot of the regional leaders were put under that term, meaning referring back to being connected to the seabirds, the crow, those who, are Mary or the regional headships in those areas. And in that, you've got the Russian, you've got the Greek, and you also have, the mafia structured within the United States itself, particularly coming out of the Chicago, Illinois area where, I've testified that Michael Karkoc came and did work and set up areas. So there's a lot of interconnections with this when you get into the regional leaders and those that they put in charge of the regional leaders, who, the birds that oversee the seas would be another way that we could put that. So as we begin to look at these things and break it down, it's important to understand the connections in these areas with the churches. One in particular in Spain, which is going to be your Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. That's going to be located right here. And that's a major spiritual gate, a major spiritual stronghold in that area. Even as you look at the picture, you see that on the very front entrance there, they have that cross, representing a major seal over that building connected to the Galicia. That's important to look at. There's a lot of these different churches in that area that are important to look at. Here is another, we see the symbology. We've talked about in some of the other videos and some of my coaching series, I talk about, how by the structure of the building, we can tell what it means. What do we see here? We see, a dome. We see the two poles, the line contract. So you've got the middle section, you've got the two other poles around it, representing the ball, the Ashtaroth poles, the dome representing that this place is also a temple of Artemis. We also see the triangular topper telling us that this is a temple. And, when you see more symbology like this with the triangle toppers, where it kind of looks like more like an Egyptian pyramid or the Aztec or Inca pyramids, that tells you that that's a building where you have more of the Order of Phoenix. So there's different things in these areas that, we're going to you'll begin to recognize symbols across the board. One of the main things that we need to understand in this is, when we see on those crests, the crow symbology, like, you see in my background on the right-hand side here, we see that crow above a red line. Where does the crow go back to? And it goes back to, their worship of the triune goddess Isis. But sometimes there's specific other entities that they're going to pull into that worship. In fact, when they establish some of these older areas, especially the underground, both the underground and the water cities, their ruling structure is a little bit different than above ground. We talked about in the structure of the system, the above ground, you will have, you have the mothers of darkness, you have the councilmen underneath them. Then for their quadrant leaders, you have the grand high priest and priestesses. Underneath those, for your regional leaders, you have the high priest and priestesses. And then you'll get into the 5 departments of the system governing at a regional level. Well, in the underground and in the water cities, it's structured a little different. They place a position that they'll call a queen above that area, and that queen will have 3 wizards that will rule and reign with her. So we see over these Galatia areas, you do have somebody who's in governance, and that position is in the structure that we just talked about for underground cities and the water city. So what does that tell us? That tells us that in these Galatia areas, that you have underground governance as well. And you're going to have a specific position then of a queen who's going to be put under the imagery of Morgan. And, that's who the crow represents, is the war goddess Morgan. And what are some of Morgan's symbols? These are things that we're going to recognize, like the 3 twirls here representing, or the Triskeli representing the 666. You have the 6, the 6, and the 6. You have the crow, but we also see that 666 symbology in the crow. This is the same for the Junior Eagle youth programs. You have a hidden 666 there. We also see it in the triquetra, which you see the 3 overlapping leaves. But again, this representing that phallic symbol. Or you also have, the Eye of Horus sideways, or the Masonic easel, or just a circle like they have here, this middle part representing that part of the Order of Melchizedek, and the wings of the different branches being put out there. You also have that same symbology here, but instead of, they've got that main circle, and you've got the two moons in different directions representing the wings there. So, that's going to be the governance structure in those areas, that who are going to be the wizards, where are the wizards, where will we find them, where will they be located above ground, where their connections or entrances into the underground. I'm going to propose that that's highly going to be connected to those Greek Orthodox churches and to certain positions of those wizards where, they'll be known as the white, the gray, or the black wizards. And each of them, will be beholden to whoever holds that position of Morrigan in their area, or the position of the queen. So in these areas, usually you're going to have that sorceress. The queen will be somebody who is a sorceress. She will be the main one. What does Morrigan specialize in? War, fate, and foretelling doom. So, that's who they'll be beholden to for things that are going to be transpiring and happening in their area. Again, Halik or Halka, meaning the same thing, means raven, So where is the raven city? We've got it right here. Halik is one of the main cities there in Ukraine. And that's where you're going to find some of this governance structure in that area, over Galicia in that area. This is going to be, your main underground stronghold in that area. And you've got a lot underground there. That's what I'll say about that for now. You're going to have different buildings, castles in the area that are connected to that area, but a lot of it can also be accessed through the Greek Orthodox churches there. And, so this symbology is very important to understand when we're looking at these areas, and to understand, what different things mean. And in this, on the light side in the Catholic Church, how are they going to represent some of this for that female that they're going to raise up? They're going to give that name, that imagery of Mary, and they're going to connect it to the golden prayer, and again to those sufferings that Mary went through. So I encourage you to go back, check out Foundations of Kingdom Living, Unveiling the System Structure course, and we hope to see you back soon. Thank you.